We're live on Twitch.
Okay,
And then let's see if we are live on YouTube as well.
Yeah, let's see what's happening there.
Go live.
Dang, Liz Cheney said she'll vote to impeach Trump.
Really?
Trump? Yeah. That's not a good look for him. Yep, we're live. I see it.
On YouTube as well?
Yes, I see it. Oop, there's an echo. Haha.
Okay, yeah, so I just gotta make sure. Okay, so sweet. So let me just make sure that we have Overton window is shifting. And will Africa see vaccine justice?
Ooh, I like that name.
That's just for the stream. The
Works for
tonic
me.
accord discusses the Overton window in political theory, as well as welcomes a guest to the podcast. And her name is Madeline Quaisbarth. To talk about.
Let's see. Quaisbarth. You actually pronounced it like perfectly.
Quaisbarth?
Yes, according to what they said in the email.
Okay. What is it, man? Bauxite mining in Africa. Cool. Okay.
And yeah, I was thinking maybe background on that, like just put like the map of Guinea. I don't know, something. I don't know. Yeah.
For when she comes on, like as something to look at on the stream, like a map of Guinea. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I was gonna say probably don't put the paper up just because it hasn't been published yet. You know what I mean? Paper up just because it hasn't been published yet. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I'm not gonna put the paper up. I'm not gonna put the paper.
Just cover my ass.
That's a good call. When does it go live though?
I don't know. We can ask her about that because I actually don't know because it could actually be live now because the last cycle ended in December. I just don't know if she got it out or not. Don't know about that, but
gotcha.
Figure that out.
All right. Well, yeah, we can't figure that out. Let's go up here. Go up. Do some of this. Sorry, it's just we can make this one a little bit shorter, I guess.
Yeah, no, if you just do like 20 something.
All right, we're streaming. Cool. How do you want to do this one?
Do you want to intro or
sure?
I don't care.
I can intro this.
Sweet.
All right, man. My fucking monitor is so bright that I look like I look like a ghost. Okay. How do I do dark mode? Settings, dark mode.
Actually, there we go. That looks a little better. Yeah, you're not angelic anymore. So.
Where is?
Probably. It's weird. You would think it'd be an appearance.
Right. Oh, yeah. Here we go. Yes.
Ah, nice. Okay.
Cool.
That looks good.
I guess it doesn't affect the actual web page though. It doesn't. Whatever. We're just gonna do it. All right, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Recording in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast, where I, Drew Nepoli, and my co-host here, Alex Kapitko, discuss politics, whether it's in regards to the United States or the world. And today we're going to be discussing an idea in political theory, which is the Overton window. This was developed by Joseph P. Overton, who stated that this idea is basically discussing the range in which society talks about certain things and what is determined as popular and sensible versus radical and unthinkable, right? And we're going to be discussing one, not just the idea of the Overton window, but how it relates to modern politics. We're going to be discussing a little about India as an example of the moving Overton window, and we're going to be discussing its relation to current events such as the Capitol siege and Trump's politics and how that has shifted the Overton window in American politics. So, Alex, how you doing, buddy? Give us a little bit of background and your thoughts on the Overton window.
Hey, what's up, Drew? Doing pretty well, just staying at home, doing the thing. We're 10 years into the pandemic now, I think, something like that. But
it feels like it.
Anyways, yeah, the Overton window is something that I think for decades people have really talked about, but over the last, I would say kind of in the Trump era, maybe even in the Tea Party era on, I feel like it's kind of become more mainstream again. And yeah, Joseph Overton, like you mentioned, I think he's kind of an interesting guy. He was definitely a libertarian, and his idea, and I'm just going to kind of just read the sentence out of his website that talks about it, was that if you want to have effective change in policy, he proposed it was not to advocate for minor changes, but to make this unthinkable idea become mainstream. And so, I mean, in a general nutshell, there's a spectrum that they always show, right? Where there's kind of extremes, maybe on the left or extremes on the right. And then in the middle, there's kind of a window that kind of goes in a gradient from like moderate to center. And that's kind of what are I guess you could say the Overton window is kind of framing acceptable dialogue, acceptable policy, and acceptable rhetoric during any period of time. And so the idea of someone like Overton is that instead of saying, hey, we want abortion rights, instead of just saying, let's work on legalizing abortion in all the states, he would argue that let's just go to the extreme and say, let's just legalize all abortion no matter what. And it would actually cause that window to start moving in that direction. Even if it never gets to that extreme of legalizing all abortion, it would still maybe change the conversation. So over time, there's incremental steps. And I think the same you could say happens on, say, the right, but more in terms of dialogue. I feel like especially in the Trump era and kind of even going back to the Tea Party era, it's been kind of more about rhetoric and what can we say and what is acceptable to say. And can we keep kind of playing with that and expanding it and see how far we can go? So I'm just kind of curious because since Trump and since Brexit, and I think kind of since the norm, just the kind of crazy world we live in right now, it does seem like this window's expanding. And our kind of expectations of what people can say and what policies people are fighting for do seem to be expanding.
Which is really interesting because I agree. I agree that the Overton window, in my view, is expanding. The multitude of ideas and the breadth at which we talk about different ideas in American politics, at least, is expanding. I mean, to back up my claim, the fact that the popularization of Bernie Sanders, where a decade ago Medicare for all was probably considered outside of the Overton window, even progressives like Obama were not willing to go that far as of a full government rehash of the complete insurance system, health insurance system, and a single payer healthcare. Like single payer healthcare was not in the Overton window, whereas in the last 4 to 8 years, Bernie Sanders has perhaps popularized an idea that has now entered into the Overton window. On the other side of the scale, things like separating immigrant families at the border from children is something that I don't think was on the Overton window, even for a anti-immigrant Republican in 2004. I don't think necessarily separating families from children at the border was something that would be considered on the Overton window until the Trump era, and so. Those are just examples of how I see the Overton window expanding in America. I think the interesting thing is, again, the connection to the Trump era is I think a lot of people in the news hear the word normalization, and they say, oh, Trump is trying to normalize children's in cages at the border or whatever. And I think that plays into this idea of the Overton window. So someone who just follows the headlines might hear the term normalization. And then looking deeper into political science, you would discover that that plays into the idea of the Overton window, which is, like you said, the idea of the window is not just to see where we are, but actually how to move that window. And Joseph P. Overton and the political scientists that came after him discussed that this window is a means at which to actually like understand where people are and then push them in a certain way. And what you mentioned was the Overton window is about you actually go for the unthinkable. You go for the unthinkable, and then people recoil back to something that's maybe more acceptable, but you've still moved the window across, right? I think a great example of that is the way that popular media, Democrats and Republican and middle of the ground Republicans are now viewing people like Mitt Romney, right, as a middle of the ground Republican who's rejected Trumpism, whereas in 2008 he was not at all a middle of the ground Republican based on people's perceptions. So that the Overton window has shifted. Trump has pulled the Overton window a certain way where politicians we considered pretty right wing are now viewed as more middle ground or just anti-Trump, so that their ideas in the Overton window are now less radical and more in the popular and sensible position.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That was something I was thinking about too. Was kind of I think actually kind of the split in the Republican Party is a perfect example of kind of the outcomes of the Overton window, I guess you could say, because I was watching a video and the point of the video was people don't have to accept an idea, they have to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the idea of the Overton window. And I think about people like Mitt Romney, Bill Kristol, a lot of these never Trumpers, Kellyanne Conway's husband, people like them who I think in a normal era, progressives, centrist Democrats wouldn't like them, right? Like I think of Bill Kristol. He was one of the architects of the war in Iraq, a neocon, quite despised by the left.
Yeah.
But then Trump taints the party and just goes so crazy. And everyone expects Trump to lie. Everyone expects Trump to say crazy stuff. And it comes to the point that, okay, never Trumpers are like the normal now. And it's just really interesting to see that happening because it's almost skewed how we almost look at reality inside of our political sphere anymore. Because, okay, if you're not a Trump sycophant, all of a sudden now you're normal. And I mean, I could just go further into that and say that, we're used to everything Trump does. I mean, even in 2016, when he was talking about Hillary Clinton, he joked about not accepting if she won. And so I think going into this chaos over the last couple of weeks, a lot of us were kind of expecting Trump to do something because the bar is so low at this point. And that everyone's like, of course he's going to do something. We're used to it. And that goes back to, we didn't have to accept that Trump is going to challenge the election, but we're used to it. And you could say the same, I think, in terms of, Bernie's another great example. Like just the fact that he wanted to go different, obviously a different guy. And he's not rhetoric based as much as actually like moving the policy arrow, I would say. But it's true. If you're talking about stuff like free healthcare, free college, it does just change the compass of the room, changes the temperature of the room, And it's just interesting because I would say the Overton window is really about political boundaries. That's kind of what I would say. It's kind of just a map of what strategists can do. Now, where it's gotten more dangerous for me, I think, is because I think the Overton window can be productive when either side is using it as a political strategy to put forth policy, right? Like when I used the abortion one earlier, or maybe gay marriage, when you're like, let's start with civil, or instead of starting with civil unions, you're like, let's just legalize all gay marriage. And then eventually there's some sort of compromise somewhere in the middle. But I'm more worried now because I actually think on a cultural level, the left is trying to shrink the Overton window in terms of how we talk about things like race, gender, systematic racism, the police. But then on the other side, the right is just trying to take advantage of this window and see how much can become acceptable. And I think that's part of why the nation is so split culturally, is because, like, I was talking to a friend last night about this, and sorry, I'm going off on kind of more culture for a second, but take like an issue like transgender, right? Like this is something that there's so much nuance to it that it's really hard to just put it under one umbrella, just to say that, all transgender issues are the same. But I would say over time that you're called a transphobe. Say if you said that I don't believe teen girls should be allowed to make this decision on their own until they're 18. Because I think that when it comes to identity politics, defund the police, some of these type of more cultural movements, I would argue that the window's actually shrinking on what is acceptable to say.
Again, I don't think this is necessarily.
It could be.
I'm
I mean,
not
it could
sure
be
it
a
is
stretch.
because like I get what you're saying, and I think this is less to do with like PC culture and more again like the policy proposals that are being thrown out. because
Well, defund the police, right? I mean, I could
right, but
say
that's what I said. But
if
defund the
you
police is an argument that I would say increases the Overton window, because the idea of completely defunding the police, and I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'm saying on the public stage, that conversation has not been had before. And I think that whether or not you agree with it, that idea expands the window because of, the tumultuous times we live in, and events like George Floyd's death have sparked, new discussions about race, new discussions about justice and policing. I'm not arguing you have to agree with them, but what I'm saying is I actually think it expanded the Overton window of what are the different options for how we police our society. Now, on the other hand, the Overton window has expanded because some people believe that it's okay to have a militaristic police force on the right wing, and that expands the Overton window as well. Um, you know,
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I'll concede that one.
because I would argue, because again, like one is I consistently argue that the pervasiveness of PC culture is not as strong as people think it is. Like most people, I would argue 9.9 out of 10 are not their careers are not threatened by, you know what I mean, like PC culture. So
Absolutely.
I really, it exists, but I don't think it's as pervasive as people think it is. And I would argue that the radicalization of these both sides of American politics is expanding the Overton window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and you do. Yeah, when I kind of look at more from that side, I think you're right in a lot of ways. I I think I was more talking about discussion more than policy, like kind of what the rhetoric is going around, and what I more mean is that I think that say initial like systematic racism, because it's such a blanket statement. I would say that now, if you don't agree with, say, certain aspects of how we even define that, the ability to actually explain how you feel in terms of policy, it might be more limited. But again, that might not be the Overton window. I feel like you're right. I think I might have miscategorized that. I think that's more just kind of the polarization of our country.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
because if you were like criticizing critical race theory in a room full of progressives, it would feel like you're outside the Overton window.
Right,
But I
right,
would argue,
and that's what I mean.
but I would argue outside of that room of progressives, in a room full of various Americans from all different backgrounds and sides, I don't think you're outside of the Overton window. Do you know what I mean?
That's a very good point. I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Yeah, and so what do you think then about people like, say, like an Alex Jones on the right? Do you think that people like them have played with the expansion of kind of the rhetoric on the right in terms of the Overton window? Because I mean, Pizzagate, for example, to me, Charlottesville, Pizzagate, and now the storming of the Capitol last week have all kind of built on each other, right? Because to me, last week almost seemed like Pizzagate on steroids, right? People were believing a lie, and they actually took up arms to fight that lie. And it's almost like something like Pizzagate seemed nuts 10 years ago or whatever it was. And now that people were expecting people to storm the Capitol in some ways, like, do you think that could kind of fit into the changing of action in terms of the Overton window? I don't know.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the fact that QAnon, in fact, the fact that we've gone from, Pizzagate being this weird conspiracy that was almost a blip on the map where we thought it was, to now you have QAnon being so prevalent that there's multiple representatives in our government that are like quoted as being a QAnon congresswoman, a QAnon state representative, and they wear that badge proudly. The fact that that insane conspiracy theory is within our Overton window is now, like, I mean, not for me, but for the American public discussion. The fact that you have a serious group of people that believe in QAnon is great evidence to the idea that our Overton window is off the charts. I really don't think conspiracies like that would exist 50 years ago. Now, the Overton window is not shifting just for no reason. There's reasons. I think one is, we've talked about it, is how social media has played into polarization and radicalization. People now can find their own groups of people that agree with everything they think and enter that echo chamber, that vortex of an echo chamber, completely free of any challenge to their opinions, and they don't need to be challenged by the public, because you can basically just be anonymous online, think whatever you think, and even if someone gets mad at you, you can just block them. So that I think that allows for the Overton window to expand. Because remember, the Overton window is based on public perception, the overall public perception. And if the overall public perception is less accountable because of our anonymity online, then that window is going to expand, and that's what we're seeing. And I think, again, the main point of that is social media has played a huge part in the expansion of this Overton window.
Yes, it has, and now it's almost gotten to a point where I don't even know if we can fix it, And I actually read an interesting article it's called "The Flaws of the Overton Window," and they actually brought up a really interesting point, which I just want to read because I think that from everyone from Rachel Maddow to Overton himself to Tea Party members, I mean, so many people have kind of taken this theory and really kind of ran with it in terms of understanding how policy changes and is adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to read this quick 2 sentences because I think it's kind of interesting, and I'll butcher it probably if I don't read it. So it says, is it changing the acceptability of certain rhetoric of the population, or is it just echoing the views of the radicals on each side? This is perhaps the Overton window's biggest drawback as a theory of change. It tells us more about the handful of activists who supposedly move the window than the voters whose opinions actually change. While Trump has certainly lowered the standard of debate on the right, he didn't have to move the consensus rightward. He played to a block of supporters who already found his proposals desirable. Sanders, too, connected with bottom-up movements such as the Fight for $15 and Occupy Wall Street. I just think that's kind of interesting because there's one more part. It also says that the Overton window, the reason why it's so popular now is because it almost describes a time that doesn't exist. It's not really an indication of where we're headed anymore and so like in general, this whole article is about how it used to be more of a strategy from both parties to get little pieces of a more radical idea, right? But it's almost now like we're so tribal that does it really matter anymore?
Um,
I mean, I don't know. Believe me, I don't know.
Yeah, is this still a useful tool to view public opinion? Is kind of the question, I guess, right? Like, is this?
Exactly.
Do you think so? I mean, shit.
I don't, because I almost feel like we've got to such a tribal part of our democracy is that almost the Overton window requires discussion, because if you're always throwing out radical ideas, if you ever want to actually get something out of them, something tangible that you can actually implement as policy, you're going to need agreement and compromise. And I feel like at this point, both sides are kind of throwing out radical ideas that only the base that likes those ideas supports. So right now, I don't really know if the Overton window even works anymore because, I mean, on the right, especially on the Trump side, like some of his policies are so extreme that even like centrist Republicans don't agree with them. And I would say the same on the left with a lot of more critical race theory, defund the police, stuff like that. Like, yes, it has caused a conversation, but we still haven't seen a lot of tangible policy yet. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, there's a conversation, but there's not much out. It's just kind of like consolidated bases. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say.
I mean, that's a whole tough one.
Because I mean, I don't know. I think I think the Overton window is expanding, but it's still useful because I think like if you look at like let's say like Trump and your middle conservative, right? I read a poll that says like 70 to 80% of Republicans still believe the election was like unfair, which is just amazing to me. And the fact that like that's still so high is because of Trump pushing this Overton window. Now that maybe the argument is the way that the window is so wide now that it's still now it's just basically encompasses everything and it's useless. That might be the case, but that may not necessarily be a bad thing. Noam Chomsky in 1998, I wonder if he'd make the same argument now. And Noam Chomsky in 1998 made the argument that the smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion. But allow every lively debate within that spectrum, even encourage the more critical and dissonant views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits that put on the range of the debate. Now, I think, given that Noam Chomsky said that in 1998, at a time where Al Gore and George Bush coming up in the election in 2000 were almost indiscernible, right? I imagine Noam Chomsky who's a pretty anti-neoliberalism, pretty outspokenly against global capitalism. I imagine he saw it as, America won't even discuss things like social medicine, and he was probably pissed off that America was in with such a small bubble of neoconservatism and neoliberalism. But he probably Noam Chomsky is probably also upset that the Overton window expansion has now included proto-fascism. If you look at things like the Capitol siege, a a a demagogue like leader promoting his supporters up until the very end, where he basically had to then say no violence, but up until they were at the gates, promoting them to basically go against the democratic process. That to me is proto-fascism. And so that's something that now is within our Overton window, apparently. Maybe not, because there's a huge backlash against it, but almost we got there. So there's good sides and downsides to this window expanding. It's not necessarily a bad thing that the Overton window is expanding. It allows for us to look at new and different ideas, and maybe adopt things that perhaps it wasn't in the American conscious 60 years ago. On the other side, though, is the Overton window has expanded to the point where we get Donald Trump, and so I think it can be a good thing or a bad thing. I just think it was interesting to bring up Noam Chomsky's criticism of keeping the Overton window small, and now that it's expanded, it's gotten crazy.
Yes, yes. No, I think that's a really interesting point. Is like I think a really interesting thing you said a few minutes ago was that it almost seems like maybe the window's been opened so much that just all the shit's flying in now.
Yeah.
That's sort of the feeling I get a little bit. And before, I think we're gonna have to keep this episode semi-short today, but I did, with the last couple minutes we have, I did want to reiterate that this is not just something that's really going off the rails inside of the United States. I think one of the bigger shockers is in a lot of Eastern Europe, but mainly in India with their current leader Modi, because he is a Hindu nationalist, and his rhetoric towards Muslims has gotten borderline scary in a lot of parts. And he's always been a Hindu nationalist, but about 10 years ago, people would laugh you off if you were expecting this form of kind of militant Hindu nationalism to be in the mainstream in Hindu politics. And we could do a whole episode on all the specifics, but he basically has made this Hindu nationalism mainstream. It's called Hindutva, and it's kind of a concept of Indian cultural, national, and religious identity. And he's really made it mainstream. Like, it's been okay to now kind of treat the Muslim community as second-class citizens. And in parts, he appointed Yogi Adityanath as the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh. And this is quite an anti-Muslim person. So he's an extremist. And so all my point is that Modi's constant attacks on the Islamic community over time, I think, have expanded that Overton window as well. And it's kind of scary to see, because I bet if you looked at the predecessor to Nazi Germany and Hitler's rise, I bet some similar things could be happening.
Yeah, people forget that, Hitler's rise in Germany did not happen overnight. It did actually happen over 20 years of normalization, the Overton window changing. And that's a really good point that India's seeing it. The Hindutva, the idea of a Hindu Indian nationalism and identity. You're right, has increased with Modi, going against I think it's called the Nehruvian secularism that the Constitution was founded on. So yeah, this Overton window is expanding or shifting, and it's interesting to note that Overton himself didn't really want it to be used on the left-right scale, and kind of wanted to be on the more freedom, less freedom scale, but it's still, I think, useful to apply to the American political system, especially since the Overton window, I think, in America has been relatively small and only recently expanding quite rapidly. So definitely an interesting way to frame political science and kind of theorize about the changes we're seeing in American politics as well as the world politics, as we mentioned. Hopefully you guys glean some kind of information from this episode. And if you're watching live, stay tuned. In a few minutes, we're going to have a guest come on. And if you're listening to the recording, definitely check out the episode with our guest as well. Take care, all, and thank you for listening.
Awesome. Take care.
All right, sweet. Okay, so we're still live streaming, but I ended that recording, and I'll name that now so I have it in my notes.
Maybe should we put this one out first, guest one later? It doesn't really matter. I don't think there's any order, right?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. It doesn't matter. I'll just name it for now. perhaps the guest one, so that she can just say that it's out sooner than later.
That's true. That's true. Sounds good. I'll tell her she's good to join now as well.
Cool. So yeah, we need to get her actually in the call, not the not the recording channel. Even though I love how we call it the podcast recording channel, and we actually never use it.
Yeah. So how do we do that actually?
So is she in the? So do you see her name on?
Let's see. I do not.
Go to text chat general.
Text chat general.
In the Tonica Core, you should see Madeline Quaisbarth in the side.
Oh, okay.
Add her. Right click and add her to call, or just hit call and add me to call, or something like that.
Okay.
Or let's see.
Add to call.
Oh, here. Add friends.
I don't know how to add to call.
Here, there we go. There. Now she's in the DM. Hey.
Okay. Hello?
Hey, Madeline.
Hey.
Hello? Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. It's good to have some interesting guests sometimes.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Hey,
Yeah,
Madeline.
It's a cool show, you guys. Hey.
Hey, I'm Drew. I went to college here with Alex, and I'm one of the other co-hosts. So just so you know, we are live right now on Twitch, though we're not recording quite yet. We wanted to just kind of say hi, get to know you a little bit. You're welcome to pull up the live stream if you want. No pressure though. And then we expect to put out this episode sometime this week.
Okay, that sounds awesome. It's nice to meet you, Drew, virtually. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
How's the week treating you? Crazy times, right?
It is crazy. I don't know, just every day going through it, waiting for the Civil War to fully happen.
Waiting for the Civil War to fully happen.
Practicing like self-defense.
Right.
It's insane here in California. Gun sales since COVID have just skyrocketed, like to a scary level. Like both sides, just everyone. It's
scarier. That's crazy. It's at a scary level now in the U.S. I feel like it was always at a scary level.
It's okay. So extra scary then, I guess we could go. Yeah, before you came on, we were talking about the Overton window, the idea of like what is acceptable, like policy and rhetoric and how that's like growing and changing, I guess. And we were kind of just talking about, Trump and kind of the way the world's going with what's acceptable speech and acceptable policy and stuff. And yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah. It's, I don't know. I guess it depends what everyone's like moral code is for acceptability.
I guess so. It's definitely shifting. So tell me a little bit about what you do at this Institute with Africa.
Yeah, so I am a research fellow for the Economic Policy Lab, which is where I met Alex. So basically just produce research articles for them. And then I am also a researcher for the Chicago Center for HIV Elimination, which basically looks at how we can reduce and eliminate HIV transmission in Chicago. I think by 2024 is our goal right now. So it's focused on the south side of Chicago. And then I'm a trained social scientist, just graduated from Chicago with my master's.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Was most of that online?
It was half and half. Yeah. I started last year.
Okay.
Hopefully I can use my degree as a weapon in the future.
Hell yeah.
Paper cut people or something. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out like what it's going to be like, because I'm going to start a master's in September, and I'm like, oh my gosh, well, we'll see. I'm like, hopefully it's not going to be all remote, because the price tag for remote learning doesn't sound great,
Yeah.
No, I think that maybe they're getting better. It wasn't great when they first transferred and they had no idea what they were doing. But hopefully by September, if it's in person, if it's remote, they'll have an idea of what they're doing.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically what I'm gonna do is once we start recording, I put together a little intro, so I'm just gonna introduce you, and then we'll maybe just kind of have you talk about that paper a little bit, and then from there we can kind of turn into a discussion. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Okay,
Sweet.
cool. Yeah, Drew. So
Okay, so
let me know whenever you're. Yeah,
we're good to officially record. All right. So any questions for us before we officially get started?
Do you guys edit this afterwards, or is it all just live?
Minimally, like we stream it, and then like we'll record the section that's like the main podcast part. We'll add in a little tag of like, and then on it'll come in like the Tonic Accord logo with some music, but we're not gonna be like editing the content down to like snippet it out or anything. Whatever you say, unless it's something absolutely ridiculous. But I don't think that's gonna be the problem. But whatever you say will be in the recording.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and I mean, I in the past have had to go through and maybe cut out like a few random noises or I don't know, stuff like that. So
dog barking, whatever.
Yeah.
I was wondering. I have a dog. She's asleep right now, but you never know.
Fingers crossed. No, we'll be fine. We'll be good.
We'll be quiet.
Cool. Right, then so let's whenever you're ready, Alex, for the intro, then I will hit the recording button for the actual like VOD.
Okay, say your last name for me really quick.
Quaisbarth.
Quaisbarth. Drew, you nailed it. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Quaisbarth. Okay, cool.
All right.
Yeah, we're good to go.
All right, so we're recording in 3, 2, 1.
Hey, everybody. Today on the Tonic Accord, we have a very special guest, and I'm excited to announce that we are going to be talking to Madeleine Quaisbarth. I'm excited to talk to her because we actually work together with the Africa Center for Strategic Progress. And she, I think a couple weeks ago, wrote a paper that I just found really interesting on the Pfizer vaccine, Guinea inequality, and just kind of the dynamics of global commerce and economics. And so today I wanted to bring her on to talk about it more. She is a Baltimore, Maryland native and a recent graduate, from the University of Chicago. She has a master's in social sciences, and she currently works for the Chicago Center for HIV Elimination, and again, the Africa Center for Strategic Progress. She is passionate about economic, racial, and reproductive justice, and she volunteers as a case manager for the Chicago Abortion Fund. So, Madeleine, it sounds like you are definitely busy, so good for you. And how's everything going? Are you staying sane during these strange times?
I'm trying. Thank you for having me on the show. Trying to take day by day, not listen to the news too much or too little, hit a nice balance to keep my sanity.
Yeah, I think that's all you can really do now. I've been trying to do news detoxes lately, where there's some days I just try to just completely shut it off, watch a rom-com or something, and just disconnect a little bit. But
exactly.
But your paper I really found interesting. So I don't know if you maybe just wanted to kind of give our listeners a background on what you wrote about and why maybe I found it interesting, and maybe it's something to share, just because I don't think a lot of our listeners, I know I wasn't aware of this, so I'm sure a lot of other people aren't as well.
Sure, yeah, of course. So broadly speaking, this paper was kind of examining how we can reconceptualize pathways to valuing lives and how they relate to the harvesting of raw materials. More specifically, it was a paper looking at bauxite mining in Guinea and a mine called the Singredi mine, which is located in Guinea. And how that mining has been used and co-opted by different types of policies, largely neoliberalism, and how that affects the Pfizer vaccine distribution. As you guys know, I'm sure as your listeners know, the Pfizer vaccine is rolled out, which is exciting, but it needs an ultra freezer for it to be stored, and that causes a lot of problems when it comes to the vial that the vaccine needs to be stored in. A lot of problems involving like microfracturing. So Pfizer made an agreement with a glass company called the Corian Glass Company, which is a really large glass company. We all probably use their products, and they go have like phone screens and things like that. But so Corian came up with a thing called the Valor vial, which is a specific vial that takes, instead of using boron, which is what's usually used in a vial, it has substituted boron out for aluminum, and aluminum comes from bauxite. So Corian gets its aluminum from the Alico Mining Company. And Alico is the parent company of the CBG, or the Compagnie des Bauxites Guinea, which is the main government-owned bauxite company in Guinea. And they harvest the bauxite from the Singiri mines. Currently, the Singiri mines are, I don't think under investigation is the right term, but there's been a lot of human rights discussion around it, as a lot of the miners and the people living around the mine have suffered from different types of respiratory illnesses, as well as a lack of resources. And there's a discussion that those who are profiting off of the mine and the material are not actually really giving anything back to the community. So it's there's kind of a morose poeticism to it, in which the people who are mining and getting this resource that's going to be instrumental in rolling out the Pfizer vaccine are doing it at the cost of their ability to breathe, in order for people who are living in economically developed countries to breathe much easier. Because in reality, the Pfizer vaccine is probably not going to ever make it to people living near the Singiri mines. Just infrastructurally, it's not possible.
I had a quick question. So bauxite is associated with the new Pfizer vaccine, but the mining of bauxite in this area is not new, right? Bauxite mining has happened in Guinea for a while.
Yeah, bauxite's been happening really since they found the mine. But the main issue was in the 1980s, when neoliberalism first kind of hit the world. In order for Guinea to contribute to the global economy, they agreed to structural readjustments by the IMF and the World Bank. And this caused Guinea to no longer be able to tax their bauxite. So people usually get, or countries get the most money when they do, what is that called? Basically when they make bauxite into alumina. And so it's more beneficial for a country to have that process happen within that country in order to sell it at a higher rate. And so before 1980, Guinea was putting a really high tax of 13 USD on any bauxite that was exported out of Guinea as a raw material, in order to try to get countries to use their facilities to make it into alumina. When they signed on with the structural readjustment with the IMF and the World Bank, part of the agreement to make them more friendly to global trade networks was to drop that tax. So now Guinea no longer has any facilities that can make bauxite into alumina within the country. So they've lost a ton of revenue.
Oof.
And who are some of their competitors? Because just from my very basic top of the iceberg research, it looks like Guinea is up against some big giants as far as who actually mines bauxite, which is Australia, China, Brazil, and India.
Mm-hmm. I think it's hard to break it down as their competitors country-wise, because I don't even think Guinea is actually a competitor. I think that the companies that are in charge of the mining in Guinea are competitors. So we have Alicon, Halico, Rio Tinto, and then you have now quite a few Chinese companies coming in to also mine in Guinea. And yeah, so you see Alico technically has 2 mines they control in Australia and Brazil. Everything else, they just have vested interest in it. And they're not in charge of the operational maintenance of it. But yeah, mainly it is these American companies, Chinese companies, and Russian companies that are mining bauxite across the world.
Wow. Always lovely. Jeez.
Yeah, the 3 best powers.
I read a little bit into that Human Rights Watch article that you mentioned that was published back in 2017. And, it talks about just the physical, mental, and economic hardships of the people. And it's really sad to me, because I feel like it's just this continuous trend, is that a lot of the developing world is just kind of used by the wealthy world as kind of a trash heap. They just kind of feel like there's no accountability for what they put out, But I did see that in 2015, the president of Guinea, who's Alpha, Conde, received a $135 million loan from the IFC. And this did violate numerous IFC standards. Do you think there's something more nefarious on just a global level, or do you think there should be some accountability in local leadership I don't know. It's kind of a really open question, but do you think there should be accountability on the local level as well, or these people maybe just need the money?
I think it's really complicated. One, I think there's definitely something more nefarious going on. For example, the president of Guinea, Alpha Conde, just won another re-election in, I think it was October, November of 2020. And he just won his third term, which is against the Constitution. However, he was able to keep his position because Xi Jinping, the president of China, endorsed it. And they have a lot of mines. They make a lot of money from bauxite. So they had a lot of vested interest in keeping Guinea peaceful and easy to mine. So in that way, I do think these like nefarious powers make it really difficult for like on the ground grassroots people to actually change things. At the same time, I wouldn't want to cancel out anyone's autonomy or like ability to change anything. I'm not Guinean. I don't live in a mine. I don't live near a mine. So I don't know what kind of more personal on the ground things you can do on a local level that could actually change what's happening. And I think it also depends when we're talking about change and like reform. Are we talking about reform in people's everyday life? Or are we talking about systemic global reform? Because I think both of these will result in different types of actions.
Right. Right. I mean, sorry, Drew, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to go on like on the local people's reactions to this. It seems like this issue goes back at least a decade. I saw a video on YouTube from 2008 from a French newsreel that had talked about miners in this town. I forget the name. It starts with an S. You had mentioned it.
Singarati. I don't actually know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. That's us Americans. But Singarati. That they had been. They were concerned about the dust storms kicked up from the mining activities leading to bad health quality. And this was in 2008, as well as, one of the miners said he got sick and the company refused to pay for his medical treatment. And then I also heard that around 2017 and 2018, there was a series of riots where, local people set up checkpoints and tried to halt mining activities. Yet, obviously, still today, we're seeing, the bauxite mining continue. So I'm wondering, like, what are the avenues for these people to take? Because it seems like to me, it seems from an outsider, an uneducated outsider, it seems like that the local government is not actually representing its people. Of course, the international companies are not looking out for the local people. And even things like, full-on rioting has failed.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough question when it comes to the idea of reform. I think you can see a lot of policies that are rooted in reform and are like allegedly rooted on social equity are often really just a way to kind of maintain peace and like however you want to define it. But I think really the best way to go about this, if we're going to agree that we live in a globalized world, that what is happening in Sangretti, what is happening in Guinea is deeply affecting me. For example, I got the Pfizer vaccine a few weeks ago, and the vaccine that went in my arm, the vial that was used was a Valor vial, which was used by bauxite. So if we want to agree that we're all in this like collectiveness, then I think it has to come with more of a collective consciousness and a change in consciousness on a global level. That can go with consumer ethics. It can go with boycotting. I don't really believe that power that we need to see change is going to come from governmental institutes or corporate institutes.
Okay.
They might, but I think that's usually a little bit harder because you always have to have some a little bit more on the extreme pushing to have any type of change.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, on that, not that I disagree with you at all, because I think this is a serious problem, but I love to play devil's advocate, as Drew I'm sure could tell you. But I've read a lot about this, and I've written a little bit about myself. But in terms of COVID impact, Africa, in terms of death, has been impacted less than other regions like Asia, Europe, the Americas. You know what I mean? And obviously, there's going to probably be worse economic ramifications in Africa due to COVID over the long term. So I really can't comment on that yet, just because we just haven't seen it yet. But at the same time, I'm like, wouldn't it be hard to have a public messaging to people collectively to do something about this when the vaccine is in such demand and need in a lot of these Western countries?
Yeah, well, I think first off, I don't know if I completely buy that there is less COVID death in Africa. If you look at testing and testing resources, there is just less resources going into Africa right now if we're talking about like overgeneralizing the continent. And so I don't know if I completely buy all the numbers, but yeah, I think what I'm arguing for is that I wish we could get to a point where we aren't playing a valuing of human lives, overvaluing one life and undervaluing the other. And I think with this comes with this pandemic and the vaccine, I don't really know. I don't have the right answer. And I don't think that we're going to be able to find the answer right now when it comes to bauxite. But I think if anything, this situation helps bring awareness to what's going on and helps bring awareness to how we can approach things in the future. Just because like this crosses so many things across like race, ethnicity, nationality, economic status, and like just basic human rights.
I think it's a good point. I noticed that it also, like, because again, I think this bauxite issue is rekindled because of the Pfizer vaccine being reliant on bauxite, or the glass used for the vials. It is. But again, that this idea of a nation that is resource rich, that feels that it doesn't necessarily see all the benefits of that, is nothing new, and it's even considered to be called something. I mean, again, I'm sure you guys know, but like the resource curse, or even the Dutch disease, and it's the idea of and Alex and I have talked multiple times about countries like Venezuela as being a sufferer of the Dutch disease, where on paper they should be very wealthy with their oil reserves, and in reality they're not. And Guinea, for maybe very different reasons, is I think in that same place where bauxite, as well as I believe they have deposits of gold, iron ore, and diamond. I mean, you would think that this would promote a large-scale, social mobilization into a burgeoning middle class, and yet we're not seeing that. And I think that this Pfizer vaccine angle on top of it is even, I guess, highlighting more the inequity of who gets the benefits from these resources.
Yeah, I think it comes down to really like who is the stakeholder. In my mind, these policies all happened in the 1980s. It's all neocolonialism. A good way to control a country is by controlling their economy. And especially if the control is not happening from actual nation states, but actually happening from corporations, it allows nations to have more diplomatic avenues that are open. So I think it just depends, like, we as Americans, as economically developed countries, we profit off of making sure that certain countries are subjugated for our interests. So when it comes to things like inequity and the burden of having good resources, that's really just like having the burden of having the Western eye on you at the cost of like the life of your citizens.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I feel like over the last maybe decade, maybe a little bit longer, I feel like we've seen a lack of public support for more neoliberal policies, but we've seen new forms of neocolonialism. Drew and I talk a lot about China and the Belt and Road Initiative, and so to me it gets really complicated because in some ways we've seen these populist movements, this anti-globalist rhetoric that's growing around the world, which kind of tells me that people are fed up with neoliberal policies because it really has benefited corporations, but it's kind of hurt the little guy all around the world, But now I'm worried because we're seeing kind of a new form of this coming out of China, where it's state-ran corporations that have, the political might of the state, but also have the resources of a corporation. And now they're pretty much doing the same thing, but with actually the Chinese government solely backing them. So I'm really worried to see kind of if we're getting into almost a new era of neocolonialism.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are. I don't fully buy that it's not still a neoliberalistic endeavor. I think it's really difficult to define neoliberalism, which is why it has so much power.
Right.
It's often just used kind of as an epithet for like left-leaning people, like liberals being like, get out of my country, you capitalists. But I think one of the ways to look at it is that we have neoliberalism is like broken into our social imaginary, meaning it's broken into what we can view as a possibility of the future. And so even within China, China culturally is a collective society. A lot of people would view themselves within a collectivism rather than the individualism of America. But still you see neoliberalistic ideology working into China through the ideas of like entrepreneurship and governance. Not governance, basically just making money. I was reading something by Dong, who was Dong Shopping. Shoot, I forget his name. He was like the previous one of the party leaders of China. He was like the architect of modern China.
Right.
Dong Shopping. And
I have trouble with that name.
Yeah. Back to me being an ignorant American. But basically he said to get rich is glorious, which I think is just kind of demonstrates that neoliberalism has really woven itself into the social imaginary of our whole globe. So I don't think neoliberalism is really done. I think maybe it looks a little bit different, but I think China is maybe doing like an authoritative version of neoliberalism, but it's still very much part of neocolonialism. That being said, I don't know if it's time to come up with a new term to talk about what is happening now in economically developing countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one could argue that maybe it's an evolution of neoliberalism, which almost throws out kind of the multinational corporation in exchange for the kind of Chinese state, which I think could have its own Frankenstein type of monster come out of it. And it scares me just because, I mean, you look at some of these infrastructure projects in, the east coast of Africa, and I mean, they're not building up the economies either. They're, bringing in Chinese work or other corporations, other countries, doing the same. They're bringing in, they're outsourcing their labor. So it's not really a trickle down assistance to the actual people living there either, So it's kind of like take the benefits and don't help the populations that live there.
Exactly. You can see that and also in like South and Central America too. Same thing happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a little bit about on a different episode about like actually exotic animal trade, how a ton of Chinese workers in South American jungles are like basically stealing tiger claws and teeth and stuff to take back to China. And it's this whole, it's a small problem that's a reflection of a larger grand issue of like, the fringes of globalization and how it's cracking some societies. Different topic though. I did want to get your idea of like, obviously this is super complex. I'm not asking you to just solve this here and now on this podcast, but for the sake of
I wish I could.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Come on.
If you could, you wouldn't be here. But for the sake of discussion, though, if you did have a magic wand, like what is something that you would change about the global structure that would avoid an issue where people are working so hard to develop a vaccine yet may never receive it themselves?
That's a question. I think in just a specific case, if we're looking at like just this in Gritty Mine and people living around there.
Sure.
Well, I think one, we'd have to talk about like what kind of vaccines are coming out. Logistically, the Pfizer vaccine is never going to get there. So I think the first step would be to make Guinea economically secure. So that'd be through allowing them to make bauxite into aluminum within their own country, because they'd make more money that way. And that give them more independence, which then allow them to demonstrate their like stakeholders within the global economy, thus demonstrating that they have like some type of right to life that being a stakeholder in the global economy now means. So I think it would be through more national lawmakers trying to kind of reclaim that power in corporations, but I also think it would really come from people like you and me, and us kind of getting educated about where we're getting our materials and our raw materials and understand the pathways that these materials are getting to us. Because I don't know about you guys, but almost everything I interact with on a daily basis is not the raw form in which it like came from the earth.
No.
Everything's been changed. Yeah.
Right.
So I think just us being cognizant of that is really the first step, and kind of like allowing us to kind of lift that veil of ignorance, and see where things are coming from, so we can figure out how we can best assist and provide action and create dialogue.
Do you almost think, and this is just pessimistic me, do you think it's almost like too late to a certain extent, because the world is so like kind of hooked on these imported products, and they're kind of hooked on this level and quality of life that maybe people are fine with complacency? I'm not saying everyone, but to me, I'm kind of bitter about real collective change, especially when the status quo is nice for a decent amount of people. And obviously, I'm not trying to sound cold there, but because I am very willing to change habits, like specific habits to do that. But I feel like a lot of people aren't. And then there's other places that are developing and finally seeing growth. And I feel like it would be hard to kind of reverse that.
Mm. Yeah, I have a hard time. I feel like I go back and forth between kind of a nihilistic worldview of like, oh, everything sucks. But nihilism is a really good way to kind of roll over and allow these powers to take an effect. Simone de Beauvoir has like a really good passage she writes about in one of her books, The Ethics of Ambiguity, where she talks about nihilism and how that's a tool to allow kind of like the subman, or the person who is subjugated. So like you and me, we're subjugated by corporations. And nihilism allows us to kind of view that and embrace that without actually deciding to make any change. So we have self-awareness without any like self-reflection, and self-accountability. And so I think it really has to come from this idea that, yes, you and I on an individual basis really can't do that much, but we also have to understand that when we're together, we are very powerful. All these corporations, our government, they are nothing without us. We are the stakeholders when it comes down to it. And it's something that we can very easily forget. And it's something that those in power like us to forget. But if we kind of follow a Foucauldian idea of biopower and body politic, that power is going to be bouncing around no matter where it goes, right? And so we have the ability to bounce that power back to us. And through that way, we can ask and start to demand change. But it really just takes us to kind of, like first look hard in the mirror and be like, you know what, things I'm doing are really hurting people. And then to talk to people and build coalitions and create solidarity in order to try to change where that power is laying.
Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that, for all the times that bauxite mining goes on unnoticed, there are other times where private enterprises do have to change their behavior because of public, reactions, right? I think it was, in the beauty industry, when people started learning about the decimations of palm oil forests, there was a bunch of companies that said, hey, we're actually not going to source our lip balms from that palm oil anymore. And I actually even looked up the company that is involved in this bauxite mine. Now, might be a little bit disingenuous, but like there obviously is public pressure, because I watched the ad from Alcoa Global Bauxite. I watched their like promo, and the last half of their promo, they didn't talk about their Guinea mine, but they talked about how they have the greenest mine in Australia, and that they got a stamp of approval from some group that the most sustainable mine, right? So again, sure, that I'm not saying that that's enough. But my argument is that there obviously is public pressure on some of these countries, and maybe it's disingenuous or they just try and get a PR move, but I do feel that some of them have changed. And my argument is not that companies are like, will do it on their own. My argument that it's proven that actual public outcry and political movement can actually alter the behavior of large companies.
I completely agree with that. Look at apartheid. That was a huge thing. Americans boycotting stuff, like Coca-Cola, deeply offended apartheid. The thing that I watched that ad as well. And the funny thing is that Alcoa technically is not the manager operator of the bauxite mine in Guinea.
Right.
So they don't have to include that. And they're very clear to say that on their website too. Because I was really impressed at first. I'm like, oh wow, like they actually care. Like they care about the environment and the people. And I was like, oh, actually it's only for 2 of their mines. So I think it's kind of to have that critical eye on corporations, even as while we're like kind of pushing them and maybe they're becoming a little bit more ethical, staying critical and looking at what they're actually saying and trying to read
Right.
between the lines is really important.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But my point is, those two mines where they're doing better is because they were held accountable. Whereas the Guinea one, because even though they own 51%, but the agreement allows that the Guinea is actually the operating manager, that they're not held accountable. And so it really is this, like, look, when they're held to account, businesses will change. I mean, Disneyland. I mean, very unrelated to bauxite mining, but Disney had to, like, completely close whole parks. They even tried to do an America themed park in Virginia, but public outcry was so great that they canceled it. They stopped it. And so I think that just as kind of a reaction to the idea of this, the nihilistic idea of, is it too, okay, can we even really do anything? I would argue that an agreement with Madeline here is that when people do collectively bargain and get together, things can happen, but it doesn't mean it's not without difficulty.
Well, just to lighten the mood on this a little bit, I mean, back in July, the Goya Beans CEO praised Trump, and all of Trump's base just flocked around buying Goya beans. So we saw just a mass mobilization of support for a kind of just brand of beans, So if people can mobilize behind that, I would hope that people can mobilize around a bigger, more important issue. And I do think that people on a general basis do want to buy something that is good. I think there's a part of the brain that would just say, would I rather buy this that's ethically created or this that's not? And yeah, I think I need to work on being less of a nihilist, because sometimes you just go, boy, we're just screwed, but it's not a good way to be.
It's easy after a year like that, like we had, man. It's easy.
True.
That is very true. Yeah, I think it's also interesting to look, because you're talking about mobilizing behind, and I was talking about boycotting.
That's true.
If there is a difference there, because I know a lot of people who boycotted Goya because of that, rather than mobilize behind it. But I don't know which one is the more powerful one. Is it getting people to do something or getting people to stop doing something? That's, I guess, another can of worms.
What a weird thing to rally behind, though, man.
That's the culture war, man.
Hey,
that's
people pick strange heroes.
Yeah, they do. They do. Drew, I don't know if you have any more questions or thoughts. Madeline, I don't know if you do as well, but
yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, I certainly learned a lot. One, reading your paper, which, by the way, when will that be publicly available so that people can know, or if you know?
It was like on the editorial cycle starting on January 11th, so it should be posted soon. I don't have the exact date though.
Okay. Well, we will, whenever that does happen, we will try to, like, edit the description to have a link to that. I definitely found it super fascinating. I mean, gosh, I didn't even know what bauxite was until I read this, and now I feel incredibly informed. So, yeah, is there anything you would like to add or discuss or caveat before we wrap this session up?
Thank you so much for having me on the show, guys. It was really great to talk to you.
Yeah, you as well. And I just applaud. I think when I read the paper, I just kind of applauded what you're trying to do and the message it's sending, because I just don't think our world can go on like this for humanitarian reasons, climate reasons. I mean, you can name a plethora of them. It's just I think we do need change, and I applaud that you're trying to do it. And I mean, just in the bio that I read at the beginning, I mean, just all the things you're doing. It sounds like you really care, and that's really cool to see.
Thank you. Trying to stay optimistic,
Hey, 2021, it's a new year. The glass is half full. Even though our last podcast episode.
First week.
yeah, I was gonna say maybe not after that last week. Well, thank you again, Madeline, and thank you all for watching. This was a fantastic episode of the Tonic Accord. And yes, so please be sure to catch this on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts. If you do want to catch it live and maybe get harass us with comments, you can check us out on Twitch, as well as YouTube Live now. And with that, I think we will wrap this up. And once again, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you all for watching, and have a good day.
Thank you.